My name is Linda Williams. I'm 29 years old, and for most of my life, whenever someone asked my parents what I did for a living, my father had a way of answering that he thought was charming. He'd smile, that wide practice smile he'd perfected over 30 years as a litigation attorney, and he'd say, "She works for Monica's company. You know Monica, right? Our younger one? She's the manager there." Not an employee, not a software professional, not even just Linda, my younger sister's employee. That was my title. That was how Stephen Williams introduced me at dinner parties, at church, at his firm's holiday events, at every Thanksgiving and Christmas and Easter for 4 years. Not with my name first, not with anything I'd built or earned or survived. Just a supporting character in Monica's story, a footnote, a warm body who happened to share their last name and clock in somewhere Monica had authority. What my father didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been building something in the quiet, something that didn't need his introduction or his approval or his carefully curated narrative about the Williams family's legacy. And on January 16th, 2026, in a glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor of a building in Back Bay, Boston, with 47 employees watching and my family seated along the wall, they found out exactly what that something was. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the morning it all started to fall apart, and the morning 2 years later that it all finally made sense. If you've ever been introduced by your family as an extension of someone else, if you've ever been the supporting character in your own story, type "That's me" in the comments. This one is for you. To understand what happened in that conference room, you need to understand what it meant to grow up a Williams in Chestnut Hill, Massachusetts. Chestnut Hill is the kind of neighborhood where the houses have names, where the lawns are maintained by crews who come on Tuesdays, where the cars in the driveway are never more than 3 years old, and the Christmas cards are always professionally photographed. My mother, Anne, was 54 years old. She'd spent 20 years as a certified public accountant in a mid-sized firm in Newton before taking early retirement in 2019. She was quiet in the way that some women learn to be quiet, not from peace, but from practice, from years of smoothing things over, redirecting tension, finding the path of least resistance through every difficult room. Her favorite phrase was, "Let's not make this into something." She said it so often it had become a reflex, a verbal hand pressing down on any emotion that threatened to rise above acceptable levels. My father, Stephen, was 58. He was a partner at Callahan and Williams LLP, a personal injury and civil litigation firm in downtown Boston. He wore his professional success the way some men wear cologne, everywhere, at all times, at a concentration that made it hard to breathe in enclosed spaces. He believed in three things: reputation, results, and Monica. Monica was 27. 27 and already a senior manager at Nexus Technologies, a mid-sized software solutions company with offices in the Back Bay. She had a bachelor's from Tufts and an MBA from Babson. She had a salary of $134,000 a year, a one-bedroom apartment in the South End with exposed brick and heated floors, and a boyfriend named Derek, who worked in financial consulting and had the kind of jawline my father mentioned unprompted at least once per visit. Monica was the story my parents told, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on the Williams family Christmas card, which featured Monica front and center for the third year running, with me slightly to her left, slightly out of focus, slightly cut off at the edge. I was 29. I had a bachelor's in computer science from UMass Boston, not MIT, not Harvard, not the school my father had wanted, which he reminded me of with a frequency that could only be described as dedicated. I was a software professional with 4 years of solid experience, a clean performance record, and the specific grinding exhaustion of someone who has spent her entire adult life trying to earn a place at a table that was never actually set for her. I was also, according to my father, my younger sister's employee. The thing is, I don't think Stephen Williams ever consciously chose to make me feel like less. I think it was something more involuntary than that, something he'd been carrying since before I was born and had never found the courage to examine. Because there was something else about the Williams family that never got spoken out loud, something that lived in the space between my parents' silences, and the way my father sometimes looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching, a question he never asked, an answer he'd decided on anyway. My mother had been pregnant with me before they were married. They got engaged in January of 1995, when Anne was already 3 months along. They married in March, quickly and quietly at the courthouse in Newton with 2 witnesses, and a lunch at a restaurant that no longer exists. I was born in January of 1996. Stephen Williams had always been a man who did the math. And I think, somewhere in the back of his carefully organized mind, he had done the math on me and arrived at a number he didn't trust. He never said it. My mother never confirmed it or denied it. It was a suspicion that lived in him the way some things live in people, silently, stubbornly, shaping everything without ever being named. Monica was born in September of 1998, full term, within a marriage, unambiguous. I don't know for certain that this is why he loved her differently, but I know that he did love her differently. The evidence was everywhere, and I'd been cataloging it my entire life. When Monica got honor roll in middle school, my father took the family to dinner at the Capitol Grill. When I made honor roll the same year, he said, "Good job, kiddo," and went back to his brief. When Monica got into Tufts, my parents threw a party for 63 people at their house, rented a tent for the backyard, hired a caterer. When I graduated with my bachelor's in May of 2018, my mother said, "That's a good school, Linda," and my father said, "Well, let's see how it goes." When Monica graduated with her MBA in May of 2021, my father gave a speech at the restaurant dinner that lasted 11 minutes and made 3 people cry. When I graduated with my bachelor's in May of 2018, we went to DeVio's, just the 4 of us, and my father spent most of the meal on his phone. I kept these things in a list, the way you keep receipts, just because I needed somewhere to put them. In the living room of my parents' house on Glencoe Road, there was a wall of framed photographs, 13 photographs arranged in a grid. Monica at her Cuffs graduation, Monica and Derek at some charity gala, Monica at her promotion dinner at Nexus, Monica on a ski trip in Vermont. I appeared in 3 of the 13. One was my high school graduation, 2014, bottom left corner, partially obscured by the edge of an ornamental mirror my mother had hung without measuring. One was a family vacation photo from 2016, where I'm standing slightly behind everyone else. One was a Christmas photo, where my face is turned, mid-laugh, so blurry you'd have to already know it was me to recognize it. I counted the photos once, late at night during Christmas 2023, when I'd gone to the bathroom to get away from the table, and found myself standing in the hallway instead of going back. I stood there for 6 minutes, counting. Then I went back to the table and refilled everyone's water glasses, because that's the thing about being invisible in your own family. You still have to show up. You still have to perform the function they've assigned you. What they didn't know was that I was already 3 months into building the thing that would change all of it. Looking back, I should have seen the signs earlier, but the truth is, I did see them. I just kept hoping I was wrong. I started at Nexus Technologies in June of 2019. I was 23 years old, 6 months out of UMass, and carrying $8,400 in debt, a combination of the last semester's credit card charges and the tail end of a student loan that my parents had declined to help with after I'd chosen what my father called the wrong school. Monica had already been at Nexus for 8 months, hired through a recruiter connection my father had made through his firm's corporate clients. She was an operations coordinator at the time, on track for a management role. The position I applied for was associate software developer. I applied through the public job portal with my own resume with no mention of Monica. I wanted to earn it clean. The interview lasted 45 minutes. I knew the technical side cold. I'd spent the 6 months after graduation doing contract work and building a small portfolio of personal projects. The hiring manager, a man named Craig Donahue, who would later become the HR director, shook my hand at the end and said, "We'll be in touch within the week." They called the next morning. I didn't tell anyone in my family that I'd applied. I told them after I'd gotten the offer, on Sunday dinner in September. And for a moment, just a moment, I saw something on my father's face that might have been surprise, might have been something else. Monica, across the table, put her fork down and smiled. "Oh," she said, "that's my company." Not "congratulations," not "that's great," just a reminder of the existing hierarchy and where I was expected to stand in it. For 4 years, I showed up at Nexus Technologies and I worked. I was not a prodigy. I was not the fastest or the most naturally gifted developer on the team, but I was thorough. I was reliable. I stayed past 6 when the project needed it. I learned systems that weren't strictly my responsibility to learn. In 2020, 2021, and 2022, my performance reviews came back the same way: exceeds expectations. Not because I was performing for anyone, but because I genuinely liked the work. I liked solving problems. I liked the clean logic of systems that functioned the way they were designed to. What I didn't like was what was happening in the background. Monica became a manager in November of 2019, 4 months after I started. She became a senior manager in March of 2022. As her title grew, the dynamic at work shifted in ways that were subtle enough that I couldn't name them at first. I'd walk into a meeting and conversations would stop a half beat before they normally would. A project I'd been assigned would quietly get reassigned without explanation. A commendation I'd received from a client would appear in the quarterly report with no attribution. At home, it was simpler and cruder. My father had started introducing me, by 2021, as Linda. She works for Monica's company, not at Monica's company. For Monica's company. A small word, an enormous distance. I never said anything. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was being too sensitive. I'd heard that phrase, "You're too sensitive, Linda," so many times and in so many contexts that I'd started to believe it. Then came March 15th, 2023. It was a Thursday, 9:47 in the morning. I was at my desk revising a back-end process for a client onboarding system when Craig Donahue appeared at the edge of my cube and asked me to come to his office. The walk from my desk to HR was 42 steps. I counted them because I already knew, the way you sometimes know things before they're said. Craig had a folder on his desk and a look on his face that I recognized from courtroom dramas, the look of someone delivering a verdict they didn't entirely agree with. He said they'd received concerns about my performance, multiple concerns, that the decision had been made to terminate my employment, effective immediately, that I had 20 minutes to collect my belongings. 20 minutes. 4 years. A cardboard box. I packed a framed photo of my grandmother, a small succulent I'd kept on my desk through 3 software releases and 1 office renovation, and a coffee mug that said Boston Strong that I'd bought from a street vendor during my first week of work. I walked down the hallway. As I passed the glass wall of Monica's office, she was on the phone, chair turned toward the window, laughing at something. She didn't turn around. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Priya Shah. Priya was a QA engineer who'd been at Nexus for 6 years. We'd eaten lunch together maybe 200 times. She was the closest thing I had to a friend in that building, and the fact that it had taken her 2 weeks to call me told me something about the pressure she'd been under to stay quiet. Her voice was low, like she was afraid of being overheard, even at home. "Linda, I need to tell you something. Monica went to Craig and the board 3 weeks before you were let go. She said you were a liability. She said you were making clients uncomfortable. She said you had an attitude problem and that having you in the building was damaging the company's reputation." A pause. None of it was true. I think everyone knew it wasn't true. But she's a senior manager. Nobody was going to push back. The call lasted 11 minutes. I remember because I was sitting in the parking lot of a Whole Foods on Boylston Street, watching the timestamp on my phone, feeling something inside me go completely still. None of it was true. My own sister had walked into HR and built a case out of nothing. She hadn't needed it to be true. She'd needed it to be said by the right person in the right room. I sat in that parking lot for 40 minutes after Priya hung up. I didn't cry. I just sat there, watching strangers load groceries into their cars, thinking about what it meant to be fired by your own family. I didn't tell my parents why I'd left. I told them I needed a change, that I was burned out, that I was figuring things out. My mother said, "Well, I hope something comes up soon." My father said, "Monica still has her job." He said it like it was an observation, like he was just noting a fact about the world. I drove home to my apartment in Allston, sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets, and let myself feel it for exactly 1 hour. Then I got up, opened my laptop, and started thinking about what I was going to build. That was the moment I stopped being Monica's employee, even if she didn't know it yet. The freelancing started because I had $8,400 in debt and rent due in 18 days. I made a profile on Upwork the same week I was terminated. My first project was a bug fix for a small e-commerce platform in Colorado, $340, completed in 2 days. My second was a database migration for a dental office in Austin, $780, completed in 4 days. Unglamorous work, reliable work, the kind of work that people underestimate until they need it done and can't find someone who does it right. By the end of June 2023, I was making $4,800 a month from freelance contracts, enough to cover rent, pay down the debt, and buy food that wasn't on sale. Not enough to feel stable, but enough to breathe. And in the breathing, the ideas started. I'd noticed something working across those contracts. Every team I worked with had the same problem. Task management spread across 3 different tools, project visibility that existed for managers and not for the people doing the actual work, communication buried in email threads that nobody could find 6 weeks later. Companies were paying for coordination and getting chaos instead. I started building in September of 2023, every morning from 5 to 8 before the freelance work started, every evening from 9 to midnight after it ended. My apartment on Harvard Avenue was small enough that my kitchen table was also my desk, my dining room, and my filing cabinet. I had a second-hand laptop I'd bought for $400 on Craigslist and a whiteboard I'd taken from a client's office when they'd thrown it out during a renovation. The app was called Streamline, task and project management built for small, remote teams with automated workflow handoffs, real-time visibility dashboards, and an integration layer that connected with every major tool already in use. The thing that made it different wasn't any single feature, it was the architecture, built to learn the patterns of how a specific team worked and surface the right information to the right person at the right moment. Adaptive, quiet, invisible in the good way. I submitted it to the App Store on February 14th, 2024. The first month, 1,400 downloads, revenue, $3,100. I told my parents I was doing some app development. My mother said, "Oh, that sounds nice." My father didn't ask what it was called, but that wasn't even close to what was coming. In July of 2024, Apple's editorial team featured Streamline in the App Store's Apps We Love section. I found out at 6:52 in the morning when I woke up to 4,300 push notifications and a download counter that had moved $47,000 in revenue in 14 hours. By the end of July, 140,000 downloads. Revenue for the month, $187,000. I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the number for so long that the screen went dark. I called one person, not my mother, not my father. I called Paul Stacy. Paul was 66 years old. He was a retired software engineer and product executive, former VP of product at a company that had been acquired by Atlassian in 2018 for figures I wasn't supposed to know, but did. He lived in Cambridge with his wife Megan, a landscape architect with a dry sense of humor and an extraordinary talent for knowing when a room needed more wine. I'd met Paul in October of 2023 at a monthly developer meetup hosted at the MIT Enterprise Forum. I'd shown up with a laptop, a half-built prototype, and the specific anxiety of someone walking into a room where they don't know if they belong. Paul was the only person who stayed after the formal session ended, who sat down across from me and asked to see what I was building, not politely, with actual technical curiosity. We talked until the O-Bomb pan on Massachusetts Avenue closed at 11. He'd asked about state synchronization across devices, about enterprise tier pricing models, about my plan for handling team permissions at scale. Nobody had ever asked me those questions before. Not my professors, not my father, not my sister. He'd handed me his card when we finally stood up to leave. "You've got something real here," he said. "Don't let anyone tell you it isn't." Paul had been checking in with me every week since. A text on Monday mornings, "How'd it go?" A reply that always came within the hour. When I called Paul the morning of the Apple feature, he picked up on the second ring. "Paul, the App Store featured Streamline." A pause. Then, quietly, I knew it. I knew it the first night. Megan got on the phone a few minutes later. She said she was opening a bottle of champagne at 7 in the morning and that I needed to come over for dinner that week to celebrate properly. I said yes before she'd finished the sentence. What Paul gave me that year wasn't money. Not yet. It was something harder to quantify. The experience of being seen by someone who had no reason to see me. He didn't benefit from believing in me. He wasn't related to me. He didn't need me to succeed for his own story to make sense. He just looked at what I was building and said yes, with no but attached. In September of 2024, I formally incorporated Meridian Labs LLC. Filing fee? $500. Paul came in as an angel investor at $75,000 and an advisor stake of 4%. He refused more equity than that. "This is your company, Linda," he said. "I'm not here to own it. I'm here so you don't make the mistakes I made at 29. I hired 8 employees. We moved into a shared office space in Cambridge. By December 31st, 2024, Meridian Labs had generated $1.94 million in gross revenue. I had 14 employees, contracts with 3 enterprise clients, and a seed round from a Boston-based venture firm closing at $2.5 million in January 2025. My father's last Facebook post of 2024 was a photo of Monica at her company's holiday party. The caption read, "So proud of this one. Hard work pays off." He didn't know. None of them did. I drove a 2019 Honda Civic. I wore the same 3 blazers on rotation. When my mother asked what I was working on, I said, "Still the app stuff, Mom. Nothing too exciting." She would say, "Well, good for you for staying busy." And I would say, "Thanks." And that would be the end of it. They had no idea I was already 27 steps ahead. They had no idea I was reading the acquisition reports on Nexus Technologies every single week. By the spring of 2025, I had been to Paul and Megan's house on Huron Avenue in Cambridge enough times that I had a preferred spot at their kitchen table, the chair near the window that caught the afternoon light. Megan made a dish called arroz con leche that her grandmother had taught her, and she made it whenever she sensed I was stressed, without asking if I was stressed. She just appeared at the table with a bowl and sat down across from me and said, "So, tell me what's going on." Not as a performance, not as a setup for advice, just because she actually wanted to know. In April of 2025, I got the preliminary figures back from the acquisition team I'd quietly engaged in January. Nexus Technologies was financially exposed. Two major clients had not renewed, and their senior leadership was in the middle of a quiet restructuring. Their valuation had dropped to $4.3 million. They were looking for a strategic buyer. I called Paul from the parking lot of my office building and told him. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. "You want to buy your sister's company," he said finally. "I want to buy a struggling software company that happens to employ my sister, Linda. I've run the numbers 6 times, Paul. It's a sound acquisition. The client base is recoverable, the product team is good, and the infrastructure is undervalued. This isn't personal." A longer silence. "Is any of it personal?" I looked out at the Cambridge skyline, at the Charles River catching light, at the city I'd grown up just outside of that I'd always felt slightly too far from. "Maybe a little," I said. He laughed. Megan's voice appeared in the background. "Is that Linda? Tell her we're making churrasco on Saturday." That Saturday, sitting on their back porch with a plate of food and a glass of wine I hadn't asked for but absolutely needed, Paul said something I've thought about almost every day since. "You know what the difference is between you and your family?" He put his fork down and looked at me directly. "They needed you to be small to feel large. You never needed that. You just needed room to build." He picked his fork back up. "So go build." I signed the letter of intent on the Nexus acquisition in May of 2025. The deal closed in January of 2026. The night before the all-hands meeting, Megan drove me home from their house. She parked in front of my building and turned off the engine and sat with me in the quiet for a moment. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," I said, "and completely fine." She reached over and put her hand on mine. "That's exactly how you're supposed to feel." A beat. "Paul and I are going to be so loud tomorrow, just so you know. Embarrassingly loud." I laughed, actually laughed, the kind that comes from somewhere real. "Thank you for all of it." She squeezed my hand once. "You did the work, Linda. We just got to watch." For the first time in my life, I understood what it felt like to be someone's first choice, not their obligation, their choice. In the 6 months between signing the LOI and closing the acquisition, I did something that felt at the time like discipline. I went quiet. I stopped calling home on Sunday evenings. I answered my mother's texts with "doing well, busy with the work projects," and nothing more. I skipped the July 4th gathering at my parents' house, told them I had a client deadline, which was technically true if you defined client broadly enough. I skipped my father's birthday dinner in September. I sent a card instead. He texted back, "Thanks." One word, no punctuation. I watched from a careful distance as the family moved forward without me. My father posted a photo of Monica and Derek at a Red Sox game in August. Summer with the best daughter and the best son-in-law to be. I read the caption 3 times. Then I put my phone face down and went back to the acquisition due diligence report I'd been reviewing. Monica posted on LinkedIn in September her promotion to VP of Operations at Nexus. 847 likes. My father commented, "We couldn't be more proud. This family is blessed." Derek commented a string of fire emojis. I didn't comment anything. I had already read the Nexus financials for that quarter. Their 2 largest enterprise clients had given notice. Monica's VP title was, structurally speaking, a deck chair on a ship that was slowly taking on water. At Thanksgiving in November of 2025, I made an appearance. 45 minutes, enough to avoid a conversation about why I hadn't come, not long enough to sit through a full meal. My mother hugged me at the door. My father shook my hand. He had always shaken my hand since I was 12 years old, as though physical affection was a resource he needed to ration. Monica was in the kitchen with Derek, laughing about something. She glanced at me when I came in and said, "Hey, you made it," in the tone of someone surprised to see a marginal acquaintance at a party. I had a glass of wine. I answered questions about work with, "Still the app stuff, going pretty well." I passed the cranberry sauce when asked. I left before pie. In the car, sitting at the corner of Glencoe Road, I called Paul. "How was it?" "Fine, uneventful." I watched the lights in my parents' house through the windshield. "They have no idea." "Good." A pause. 6 weeks, Linda. 6 weeks. They thought my silence was defeat. It was the sound of a closing deal. I wore a navy blazer over a white silk blouse and charcoal pants, heels I'd bought specifically for this, 3 inches, steady, the kind of shoes that make a certain kind of sound on a hardwood floor. My hair was down, I carried a single manila folder and nothing else. Paul and Megan were already in the building when I arrived at 8:15. Paul was in the small conference room on the 14th floor reviewing the transition documents. Megan was sitting in the hallway outside with the coffee, reading something on her phone. She looked up when she heard the elevator and smiled. Not the wide, performed smile of someone who is happy for you in theory. The quiet, contained smile of someone who has been watching you work for a year and a half and is simply enormously glad to be here. "You look like a CEO," she said. "I am a CEO," I said. "Yes, you are." The all-hands meeting was scheduled for 9:47. The time was not a coincidence. It was the same time, to the minute, that Craig Donahue had appeared at my desk in March of 2023 and walked me to HR. I'd been thinking about that symmetry for weeks before I realized it. Then I leaned into it deliberately. My family had been invited through a formal letter on Meridian Labs letterhead sent to my parents' house, describing the meeting as a stakeholder briefing for community members and key Nexus personnel following the acquisition. The letter had been sent by James Hartwell, Nexus's interim CEO, who knew the full story and had agreed that transparency, complete, clear, unhurried transparency, was the right way to open a new chapter for the company. My parents had RSVP'd within 48 hours. My father's email back to James read, "We'll be there. Monica is one of our most important assets." Monica herself didn't know my parents had been invited. She was expecting a routine post-acquisition briefing. She'd posted on Instagram the night before. "Big changes at work, but whatever happens, I've built something here. Grateful for this team." She'd tagged Derek and used a filter that made the light look golden. She had no idea. I stood behind the door of the 14th floor conference room at 9:44 and looked through the narrow vertical window at the room filling up. Round table, 12 chairs. Monica was seated at the far end, laptop open, fingers moving. She was in a gray blazer and a silk blouse. We'd worn almost the same thing, I noticed. 47 employees, plus a handful of senior staff and the people my parents thought they were here to support. My mother was sitting along the wall to the left, in a chair that had been placed there specifically for non-table attendees. She was wearing her good coat, the navy one she saved for professional events. My father was beside her, upright, attentive, already performing the role of father of a senior executive. At 9:47 exactly, James Hartwell opened the door and held it for me. I walked in. The room was mid-conversation. It quieted in layers. First the people nearest the door who noticed me, then the ripple outward, until the only sound was Monica's fingers on her keyboard, still moving because she hadn't looked up yet. Then she looked up. The fingers stopped. I watched her face do the thing that faces do when the information arriving doesn't match the file they're drawing from, a kind of brief, silent reboot. Her mouth opened slightly. Her hands went still on the keyboard. The pen she'd been holding slipped from her fingers and hit the table and rolled 3 inches before stopping at the edge. Nobody picked it up. "Good morning," I said. James stepped to the front of the room. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. As you know, Nexus Technologies completed its acquisition by Meridian Labs last week. I'd like to introduce Linda Williams, founder and CEO of Meridian Labs, and effective today, the owner of this company." My mother's hand went to her mouth. I saw it in my peripheral vision, and I let it be there. I walked to the front of the room. I set the manila folder on the table. I looked out at 47 people who'd spent the last 4 years coming to this building every day, building something that worked, and I thought about what they needed to hear right now, which was not my family history, which was not a reckoning, which was something much simpler and more important than that. "Thank you, James." My voice was steady. Not performed steadiness, actual steadiness, the kind that comes from being completely certain you're exactly where you're supposed to be. I want to start by being transparent with everyone in this room, because I think transparency is how good companies are actually built. A pause. Some of you know me, most of you don't. My name is Linda Williams. 14 floors below where we're sitting, I had a desk in this building for 4 years. I was a software developer. I had a strong performance record, and I cared about this company's work. In March of 2023, I was let go under circumstances that had nothing to do with my performance. The room was very still. I'm not here to relitigate that. It was 3 years ago, and I have made my peace with it in the most productive way I know how. I let a beat pass. What I am here to do is run this company honestly, invest in the people who've kept it running, and build something better than what was here before. I opened the manila folder, I pulled out a single sheet of paper, the Meridian Labs 1-year transition roadmap, and slid a copy to each person at the table. These are your new compensation bands, effective March 1st. These are the 3 client recovery initiatives we've already begun. These are the 2 product lines we're sunsetting and the 2 we're expanding. And this, I tapped the bottom of the page, is my open door policy. Literally, my door will be open. If something isn't working, I want to know. I looked around the room, at faces that were processing, recalibrating, deciding. I looked finally at Monica. She was sitting very still. Her face was composed in the way that faces compose themselves when the alternative is coming completely undone in public. Her hands were flat on the table. Her laptop screen had gone dark. I didn't say her name. I didn't need to. Every person in that room understood the architecture of what they were witnessing. A younger sister who'd spent her career being managed, reduced, labeled, standing at the head of the table that had once been someone else's. "Any questions about the transition?" I asked. A beat of silence. Then a hand went up near the middle of the table. A developer I'd recognized later as having been at the company for 6 years. The kind of quiet, technical contributor who never gets enough credit. "What happens to the current management structure?" "It will be evaluated and rebuilt over the next 60 days, based on what the teams actually need," I said, "not based on what's been historically comfortable." He nodded. He wrote something down. After the formal meeting ended, the room shifted into the informal noise of a dozen separate conversations. I stayed at the front, speaking to the people who came up, asking questions, cautiously optimistic, the particular energy of people who'd been uncertain for months and were now deciding if they could trust the new direction. My father crossed the room toward me. He moved slowly, deliberately, the way he moved when he was in courtroom mode, organizing himself, deciding on his approach. He stopped about 4 feet away from me, the professional distance, the distance of someone who hadn't figured out how to be a father in this moment. "Linda?" "Hi, Dad." He looked at me for a long moment. The litigation attorney in him, I think, was looking for the argument he hadn't seen coming. The man under that was just a 60-year-old looking at his daughter and arriving late and imperfectly at something like understanding. "Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at him the way you look at someone when you've stopped being angry and haven't yet decided what comes next. "Would you have believed me?" I said. "Or would you have found another reason it was Monica's story?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. "I know," I said. "That's what I thought." His throat moved. "I introduced you as her employee." He said it quietly, like he was reading a thing he'd written and was only now understanding what it said. "For years, I said that about you." "Yes, I didn't." He stopped. Started again. I didn't think about what that meant. I looked at him, at this man who had carried a question about me for 29 years and never once found the courage to ask it out loud, at the damage that silence had done, not just to me, but to both of us. "I know you didn't," I said, and it was true. That was almost the harder part, that he hadn't been calculating. He just never stopped to look. A few feet away, Monica was gathering her things. She wasn't making eye contact with anyone. Derek had texted her 4 times in the last 20 minutes. I could see the phone vibrating in her hand. My mother appeared at my father's shoulder. Her mascara had tracked slightly. She held her good coat against her chest like a shield. "Jasmine," she started, then corrected herself. "Linda, She shook her head. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything, Mom." "We called you her employee." "I know. Every time someone asked about you—" "Mom," I said it gently, "I know what happened. I was there." I took a breath. "I'm not asking for anything from you today. I'm not asking you to explain it or fix it or apologize your way through it. I just needed you to see me, the way you should have been seeing me for a long time." She pressed her lips together. Her eyes were very bright. I picked up my manila folder. "I have a company to run." I walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard my father say my name once more. "Linda," quiet, like a question he still didn't know how to form. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. I had 47 employees, a transition roadmap, and a company I'd built with my own hands. I had Paul Stacy one floor down reviewing the org structure with the operations team. I had Megan, who texted me at 9:58, "How'd it go?" and to whom I had already replied, "Go open that champagne." The elevator doors opened. I stepped in. The doors closed. I looked at my own reflection in the stainless steel. The last time I left this building, I was carrying a cardboard box. This time, I owned the building. In the 3 weeks following January 16th, I received 11 missed calls from my mother, 4 emails from my father, and 1 message from Monica. Monica's message had no subject line. The body read, "I know I owe you an explanation. I'm not sure you'll want to hear it, but if you ever do, I'm here." I archived it without responding. Not from cruelty, from the recognition that some conversations require more time than 3 weeks and more honesty than either of us had yet built the capacity for. Maybe one day, maybe not. That was a door I was leaving in place for now, without forcing it. My father called a 4th time, 12 days after the meeting. I answered. We talked for 9 minutes. He said he was sorry. Not the lawyer's apology, the careful, qualified one. Just a tired, direct, human sorry from a man who had spent his career building arguments and had finally run out of ones that held. He said he'd introduced me wrong for years, and he knew it, and he didn't have a good explanation for why. I told him what I'd come to understand, that I thought I knew why, that I thought there'd been a question living in him since before I was born, and that he'd answered it the wrong way by never asking it at all. That whatever the answer to that question turned out to be, it didn't change what I'd built. It didn't change who I was. He went quiet for a long moment. "I'm proud of you, Linda," he said. "I should have said that 1,000 times before today." "Yes," I said, "you should have." We didn't repair everything in 9 minutes. You can't repair 30 years in 9 minutes. But I think we both felt the shape of what might eventually be possible if we were honest enough and patient enough to build toward it. That was enough for one phone call. Meridian Labs completed its first quarter of post-acquisition operations with 34 full-time employees across both entities. The 2 client recovery initiatives delivered. One client renewed at an expanded contract value of $312,000 annually. The second was still in negotiation. Paul joined the board formally in February. Megan sent flowers on the day we signed the first new enterprise contract under the Meridian name. A small arrangement, desert wildflowers, with a card that said, "Told you." Monica was repositioned as a product coordinator in the February org restructure, 2 levels below her previous title. She accepted it. She had options. She could have left, looked for a new role, leveraged her MBA and her years of management experience at other companies. She chose to stay. I thought about why. I didn't ask. Her reasons were her own. At Christmas of 2025, I spent the holiday in Cambridge with Paul and Megan. We ate too much, played cards, watched old movies, and sat by the fire talking about everything and nothing, the way people do when they're comfortable with each other. It was the first Christmas in my adult life where I didn't spend any part of the evening in a bathroom calculating how many more hours I had to stay before leaving was acceptable. Priya Shah joined Meridian Labs as a senior QA engineer in March of 2026. She texted me the morning her offer letter arrived. "I always knew you were going to do something like this. I'm just glad I get to be part of it." I texted back, "You were part of it from the beginning. You made the phone call." And Dr. Stephanie, the Nexus developer who raised his hand in the meeting, the one who'd worked there 6 years without recognition, was promoted to engineering lead in the same restructure that repositioned Monica. He stopped me in the hallway on his first day in the new role. He said, "I want you to know, when you said the management structure would be based on what the teams actually need, that meant something to me." I thanked him. He nodded and went back to work. This is what I want you to understand about this story. It's not about revenge. It would be simpler and in some ways more satisfying if it were about revenge, but revenge is a destination, and I was never trying to arrive somewhere. I was trying to build something. For 29 years, I was introduced as a function of other people's stories. My younger sister's employee, the other one, the UMass one, the one who didn't quite measure up. I spent so long trying to understand what was wrong with me that it almost missed the fact that the question itself was wrong. There was nothing wrong with me. There was just a family that needed me small, and a father who'd been answering a question with his silence for 3 decades, and a sister who had decided at some point that the easiest way to stay on top was to make sure nobody climbs past her. I'm not going to stand here and tell you I never wanted them to see it. I did. I wanted my father to look at what I'd built and feel the particular specific weight of 30 years of underestimation. I wanted that for a long time. But here's what I learned. Standing at the head of that conference room table, the moment they saw it, it stopped mattering whether they understood it, because I was already past it. I was already inside the work, inside the company, inside the version of myself I'd been building in silence for 2 years. Their seeing me was real, and it arrived. And by the time it did, I had already learned to see myself. You don't need your family's permission to become who you actually are. You don't need their title for you, or their narrative about you, or their version of the family wall on Glencoe Road where your face is cut off at the edge. You just need room and time and one or two people who look at what you're building and say yes without waiting to see how it turns out first. Build quietly, grow silently, and one day, when you're ready, step into the light. They'll see you then, but by that point, it won't matter because you'll already see yourself. I'm not my younger sister's employee. I never was, and I never will be again. Thank you for listening. Thank you for seeing me.